Laughing Loon presents Building Ootek, Part 10. The kayak pictured here is Ootek, designed and being built by Rob Max. The building shown here is a condensed version of the more detailed information in my instruction books and how-to videos available on my website. In Part 9 of Building Ootek, we finished the magnetic hatch cover construction. With the construction of the kayak finished, it's time to round edges and smooth surfaces in preparation for final epoxy coatings. The underdeck edges of the coaming riser need to be smoothed and leveled. I'm going to use rasps to do that. I'll start with the rasp on the left, which is the coarsest one. This will level stuff very quickly. The coaming riser, which was installed previously, hangs down a little bit below the deck, so what I'm doing is I'm making that coaming riser flush with the underside of the deck. Once I've leveled the edge with the coarse rasp, I'll use a finer rasp to make it smooth. Then I move on to smoothing all surfaces with 60 grit sandpaper and a soft block. I'm rounding edges, sanding flat surfaces. I would never want to use a power tool on a surface like this because it would get out of control very quickly. Small surfaces and edges should always be done with hand sanding. After sanding with 60 grit, I move to 80 grit, 120 grit, and then 220 grit in preparation for coating the wood surfaces with epoxy. The hatch deck lip is finished in a similar manner. I level the underside with a rasp and then smooth surfaces with sandpaper working by hand. The underside of the hatch lip is bare wood, and so what I'm doing now is smoothing it in preparation for multiple coatings with epoxy. The top veneered surfaces of the hatch lip were epoxied right after installation, before the ash raised lip was installed, to protect the thin veneer from being sanded through. Surfaces that are not coated with fiberglass, like the hatch lip and the cockpit coaming, get 3 coats of epoxy. Then this rough surface is smoothed by further sanding, and 2 final coats are applied before finish sanding in preparation for varnishing. Using the alignment holes I had drilled in the hull previously for the skeg box, I'm now using the saw to cut open the slot for the skeg. And then I shape and smooth that opening with a rasp. The sharper edges of the keel near the stems need abrasion protection. Fiberglass is not good on abrasion by itself. I masked off the perimeter of this edge, and I wet out a broad strip of polyester cloth with epoxy resin. When the epoxy reaches a leather hard stage, I'll trim away the masked area to leave a protected edge on the underwater surfaces of the keel near the stems. In preparation for rough sanding, I'm washing down the surfaces with water and a sponge to remove any aiming blush before sanding. I do a rough sanding using 60 grit on my random orbital sander, and I feather the edges of overlapping layers of glass like on my hull deck seams, my stems, and any veneers applied. Cured epoxy is very hard. I just noticed that I was pressing and nothing seemed to be happening, so I changed to a new sanding disc. It's important to see and feel how a new disc cuts. So when your sandpaper doesn't seem to be doing anything, you're right, and it'll tell you it's time to put a new sanding disc on. After the rough sanding and feathering all edges, I apply 2 more fill coats to give me a smooth surface, which I can then start sanding with 120 grit, 220 grit, and that surface will be ready for varnish. And then the fill coat is tipped off with a foam brush to remove bubbles and to smooth out the surface and removing any runs. This tipping off of the surface is done after every fill coat. After the fill coat's on the hull are cured, the boat's flipped over and rough sanding is done on the deck. Overlapping layers of glass at the hull deck seams and at the stem ends where veneers are applied are smoothed into one uniform flat surface. The random orbital sander needs to be used at slow speeds to keep from cutting through the glass on edges and on small surfaces. Rough sanding is done using 60 grit sandpaper to quickly level the surface, creating a uniform matte surface in preparation for the final 2 fill coats. I go over the rough sanded surface with a vacuum to remove any residual sanding dust. And roll on 2 final fill coats. The final fill coats are rolled on one at a time. It's rolled out. Fill coat, like all fill coats, tipped off. And then after that cures, a second fill coat is applied in the same manner. Depending upon the epoxy you're using, you may have to sand for a mechanical bond if you can't recoat within the window for a chemical bond. You may also have to wash down surfaces between fill coats to remove amine blush. And don't forget to tip off that fill coat. In part 11 of Building Ootek, we will do the finish sanding in preparation for varnish. For more information on my strip building techniques, see my shop tips pages at laughingloon.com. Full plans for the Sea Kayak Ootek, along with many other canoe and kayak plans, instruction books, and how-to videos are available at my website, laughingloon.com.